Hi, it's John, and in this video we're going to take a look at the Pixel Shift capabilities of the Nikon Z8 that were added in firmware 2.0, and I'll be spending some time looking at how it can be used for still life close-up shooting scenarios. My experience on the Z8 with firmware 2.0 will be very similar to the ZF body, which was the first Nikon camera to have this capability. The menu setup is exactly the same in the two cameras, with the only practical difference being the file size outputs due to the higher resolution of the Z8 over the ZF. In this video, we'll analyse the files generated by the Pixel Shift process so that you can see if Pixel Shift might be helpful for your photography. And then we'll go into the details of how to capture the images with the camera and how the files are merged on a computer in NX Studio. And finally, I'll briefly touch on how the technology works at the sensor and pixel level. Just a quick bit of background before we look at the output files. I've seen reviews of the Pixel Shift capabilities which show promising results for landscape and cityscapes where there is little movement in the scenes. And rather than repeat those tests, I was keen to look at the benefits that Pixel Shift could bring to close-up shooting. I don't own a macro lens, but I've recently started taking photographs of products I'm reviewing, which means getting close to the subject. And with firmware 2.0, I was interested to see if I could do some product macro photography on the cheap. So I set up my Z8 with the Z-mount 50mm f1.8 and pointed it at an iFootage clamp that was just lying around. All shots were at f5.6 in an attempt to balance peak resolution and increase the depth of field to a usable level. The maximum number of files that Nikon's NX Studio app will merge into an image is 32, though we have 4, 8 and 16 file merge options as well. We'll look at the 32 file merge as they have the highest resolution and color fidelity. Also, if you capture a 32 shot series, you can choose whether you want NX Studio to output a merge of 4 files, 8 files, 16 or 32. So I'd recommend just having the camera shoot the full 32 sequence if time and conditions allow. I've detailed the output options in this caption. So I shot two 32 file sequences, one with an ISO of 100 and the other with an ISO of 12,800. The higher ISO sequence will help show how the merged image handles noise in low light. Let's compare the 32 image merged file with a single raw image, firstly at ISO 100. The merged file is 180 megapixels, which is 4 times the pixel count of the single raw image. So we'll have to magnify the single raw image at twice the magnification of the merged file to compare. The single raw file is on the left and the merged file is on the right. And as we punch into 400% on the single file and 200 on the merged file, it's very evident that the merged file has significantly more detail on the machining around the hole. And it's clear to me that the coloration on the machining is cleaned up nicely, though this may be difficult to see on a YouTube video. Okay, let's look at the image noise. Typically ISO 100 is pretty clean on the Z8 sensor, but comparing the single raw image to the merged file shows a major difference in noise levels. Both chroma and luminance noise are significantly reduced. I've punched in here and hopefully, even with YouTube's compression, you can see a clear difference. The single raw file shows some mottling of colour, whereas the merged file is more consistently smooth. Now let's jack up the ISO to 12,800 and do the same comparison. The merged file is on the left and the single raw file is on the right. You can see that the details on the single raw file are starting to get smeared out with the standard noise reduction. With the merged file, while there is clearly some reduction in fine detail resolution and noise is evident using the camera standard noise reduction, the Pixel Shift is doing an impressive job of preserving details and suppressing noise. So let's dig a little further into the noise reduction options available. NX Studio gives us 4 options for noise reduction, though the interface is not intuitive. There are 3 checkboxes available in the noise reduction section. If we deselect them all, I'd expect this to turn noise reduction off, but it seems to smear fine detail while reducing noise. Next up, when selecting the camera's own noise reduction option, there seems to be no change compared to the first option. Thirdly, we have Noise Reduction Original. This gives us back some fine details at the expense of some noise. And lastly, there is an option labelled Resolution Priority Pixel Shift Merge. Nikon describes this as completely disabling noise reduction to maintain image resolution, and it's clear it has the most detail, but chroma and luma noise are very evident at ISO 12,800. I think at this ISO, I'd choose option 3 as a good balance between fine detail and noise reduction. Oh, and I exported the 4 options to JPEG. I've detailed the file sizes in the caption. As expected, the files with the least detail are the smallest, and the resolution priority option is the largest. I shot a couple of other scenarios. One was of an orchid with the 24-120Z. In this example, I'm seeing some very well controlled noise levels, though I don't think the resolution was appreciably better than the single raw image file, as the orchid's flower stem was very susceptible to movement. And one final scenario was of the shutter speed dial on my ZFC, again with the 24-120, this time at 120mm and minimum focus distance. We're seeing an increase in resolution and decrease in noise. So overall, I think we're seeing some really useful improvements in both details and noise suppression in the merged images. We also have some flexibility on whether to emphasize detail or trade some detail for improved noise levels depending on the noise reduction option selected in NX Studio. For close-up shooting, Pixel Shift has some real-world benefits. We obviously benefit from an image with more details and lower noise for a given focus distance, but another benefit is achieving a deeper depth of field over a standard file by increasing the distance of the camera to the subject while getting the same resolution of the subject. Nikon's slide here shows a nice representation of this scenario. Okay, so if you think this type of functionality could be helpful for your photography, let's quickly go over the steps involved in generating a Pixel Shift merged file. From a control perspective, Nikon allows Pixel Shift to be added to a custom control button, the I menu, or just the regular menu structure. I'll be adding it to my own My menu for quick access. The Pixel Shift menu has a few user adjustable settings. It gives you the option to incorporate a delay from pressing the shutter to the first image being taken. I've left this at the default 2 seconds just to allow any vibrations to dampen down after I press the shutter button. You can also opt to have a delay between each image. I have this set to 0 as I generally think it's best to fire off the sequence as quickly as possible. Let me know if you can think of a scenario where a delay would be useful. And then you have the option of the number of images, which I've touched on before. I think generally I'd set it to 32 images and make the choice in NX Studio of how many images I want to include in the merged file. And finally, we can choose to set Pixel Shift to be on just for one shooting sequence and then revert to the previous shooting style, or we can choose to leave it on and then manually turn it off when you've finished Pixel Shift shooting. So in my testing, I tethered the Z8 to my MacBook and used NX Tether and NX Studio that Nikon provides for free. I chose the application to record the files on both the camera and to the computer. I found tethering very helpful and straightforward for shooting close up. I was able to check the image for focus on my 16-inch laptop screen before I kicked off the Pixel Shift process. This is a specific use case, and you may wish just to capture files on the camera and transfer them to NX Studio via the card reader. Okay, once all the files have been transferred to the laptop, you can go ahead and select the Pixel Shift icon in the toolbar. This displays the group sequences of Pixel Shift images for you to choose from. Once you've chosen the group, NX Studio gives you the option of how many output files to generate and where to save the files. The merge process creates a file with an NEFX suffix. The merge file can be processed in NX Studio pretty much like a regular RAW file. The NEFX format is also supported by Lightroom and Capture One, so it can be imported and processed in those applications too. Alright, so if you're still with me, why don't we take a look at the technology behind how the Pixel Shift process works. Modern sensors have photosites, think pixel in the final image, that record the intensity of light or luminance. The photosites don't understand color, so a color filter is laid over them to separate light hitting each photosite. Commonly, filters separate the light into red, blue and green components, with just one color hitting a photosite. The camera then estimates the color of a given pixel by the color and intensity of the pixels around that given pixel. This interpolation process is called demosaicing, which is a guess of the actual color, but it can lead to unwanted artifacts. Now we have a very high level understanding of how the camera records color at a pixel level. Let's take a look at how Pixel Shift improves on this process. Using the camera's IBIS, Nikon is able to precisely move the sensor in deliberate directions and magnitudes, and it has two specific types of sensor movements that support Pixel Shift. The first involves a whole pixel movement to expose every pixel location to the 4 color elements of the Bayer filter to get an actual color read at each location. Demosaicing is eliminated and color fidelity is improved. The overall noise in the image is also decreased. There is no increase in resolution of the images from this particular process. Every Pixel Shift shooting option on the Z8 and ZF incorporates this methodology. However, the 16 image and 32 image options add a second mechanism that increases the output file resolution. This second process moves the sensor by half a pixel in the horizontal and vertical directions to effectively quadruple the number of pixels in a given image. The camera then essentially performs the first type of sensor movement at each half pixel shift location. This allows for the pixel to be exposed for each of the 4 colors as we discussed previously. We have 4 half pixel shift locations combined with 4 color locations to generate 16 files. Nikon adds one more twist by offering 8 and 32 shot sequence options. These essentially run the 4 and 16 shot sequences twice and average them for a further improvement in noise levels. Okay, so if you're still awake, let me summarize my thoughts on the Pixel Shift technology. So I'm pretty pleased with my initial testing of the Pixel Shift functionality with the close-up subjects that I've been taking pictures of. I think some of this comes from using NX Tether and NX Studio to help with the initial focus, and then how it pretty seamlessly captures the Pixel Shift files and merges them with a couple of mouse clicks. I have experience with similar technology in my old Olympus EM1 Mark II, since that camera was released back in 2016. But other than a passing interest in the technology, I didn't use it a great deal, as most of my images involve subject movement. And while it was great that the merged image could be processed in camera, it still suffered the usual movement artifacts unless the scene was very still. I like that Olympus produces the merge file directly in the camera. While it would be nice if Nikon gave us this option, I appreciate that Pixel Shift functionality in the NX Studio application is easier to update in the future as Nikon further refines their technology. So, as my shooting preferences have evolved to include some product photography, I think there is a place in my process for Pixel Shift. The increased resolution and decreased noise from this functionality is significant. And in a product photography shoot, the process of shooting and processing the files can be easily integrated into my workflow. And while I've not used the tethering capabilities in Lightroom or Capture One, I'm pretty happy with the free Nikon alternative. So that wraps up this video. If you have any questions or your own observations about Pixel Shift, it would be great to hear your thoughts. Thanks for checking out the video, and if it's been helpful, please like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below.